A millionaire walks through the aisles of a pharmacy when he's approached by a 6-year-old girl holding a small jar of coins. With a trembling voice, she whispers, "Sir, where can I buy a heart for my mommy?" When he asks where her father is, the answer leaves him devastated. The rain hammered against the windows of St. Jude's Pharmacy with an insistence that seemed to echo the frantic rhythm of Edward Miles's heart. At 52, he had built a corporate empire that made him one of the most respected and feared figures in the business world. His impeccable Italian suit was a stark contrast to the humble neighborhood pharmacy, a place he had ducked into only to escape the storm that had broken over the city. Edward didn't frequent establishments like this. His life unfolded in luxurious offices, meetings at 5-star hotels, and social events where every word was carefully calculated. But on that winter afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting with international investors, he had dismissed his driver and decided to walk through the downtown streets, trying to sort through the thoughts that seemed to grow more tangled by the day. The distinct smell of medicine and cleaning supplies filled the air, mingling with the scent of rain that slipped in every time the door opened. Edward was idly observing the shelves stocked with pills, syrups, and vitamins when a small movement caught his eye. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, was slowly approaching the main counter. She wore a faded blue dress, clearly too large for her small frame, and worn-out sneakers that made a soft scuffing sound against the cold tile floor. What drew his attention most, however, were her small hands carefully wrapped around a glass jar filled with an assortment of coins. The weight of the jar seemed disproportionate to her age, and she carried it with a reverence that stirred something deep inside him. The girl's eyes were large and expressive, a mixture of determination and vulnerability that vaguely reminded Edward of something he couldn't quite place. She approached the counter where an elderly pharmacist was sorting prescriptions and stood on her tiptoes, trying to reach the height needed to be seen. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice soft but firm, carrying a maturity that was strange for her age. "I'd like to know where I can buy a heart for my mommy." The pharmacist immediately stopped what he was doing and looked down at the girl with an expression of surprise and tenderness. Edward, standing just a few feet away, felt as if time had stopped. The child's question reverberated in his mind, a disturbing echo of something he couldn't fully grasp. "A heart, sweetie?" the pharmacist asked, crouching down to her level. "Ooh, what do you mean by that?" The girl lifted the jar of coins with both hands, as if offering a treasure. The man in the white coat said, "My mommy needs a new heart, so I gathered all my change I was saving for a doll and came to buy her one." Edward felt a sharp pang in his chest. The devastating innocence of those words hit him like a physical blow, making him question everything he thought he knew about priorities and values. For years, he had been accustomed to solving problems with money, contracts, and complex negotiations. But here was a child who genuinely believed she could save her mother with her doll savings. "Where is your mommy now?" the pharmacist asked in a gentle voice. "She's in the hospital," the girl replied, and Edward noticed her eyes begin to glisten with tears she was fighting to hold back. "She hasn't been home in 3 days. A lady said she's very sick and needs a new heart to get better." The pharmacist exchanged a worried glance with Edward, who instinctively moved closer. There was something about the situation that compelled him to act, a force he could neither explain nor control. "And your daddy?" Edward asked softly, also crouching to be at her eye level. "Where is he?" Her answer made Edward's world crumble completely. "I don't have a daddy, sir. Just my mommy." The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the rain still drumming against the pharmacy windows. Edward felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if something fundamental in his perception of the world was being rearranged by those simple, devastating words. "How did you get here all by yourself?" Edward asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the emotion overwhelming him. The girl looked at him with those large, trusting eyes. as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a 6-year-old to navigate the city streets alone in search of a miracle. "I took the bus," she answered simply. "The lady at the hospital gave me the fare when I told her I needed to buy Mommy's heart. She felt sorry for me and said, 'A pharmacy is where you buy medicine, so maybe they had hearts too.'" Edward exchanged another concerned look with the pharmacist, who had already stood up and was discreetly making a few phone calls. The situation was growing more complex with every word, and he felt a mounting responsibility for this child who had appeared in his life so unexpectedly. "What's your name?" Edward asked, sitting on a nearby chair to be more comfortable at her height. She smiled for the first time since she had arrived, and that smile completely disarmed the emotional defenses he had built over decades. "My name is Sophia," she said, holding out a small, delicate hand. "Sophia, and you, mister, do you work at the pharmacy?" "No, Sophia. My name is Edward," he replied, gently shaking her hand. "I was just here by chance, getting out of the rain. But tell me something. Has your mommy been sick for a long time, or did this just start?" Sophia shook her head, and Edward could see she was making an immense effort to be brave. "Mommy was always very tired. She worked a lot, left early in the morning and came back late at night. Sometimes she'd put her hand on her chest and say it was hurting, but she said it was just from being tired." "And what happened that made her go to the hospital?" Edward asked, feeling a growing need to understand the whole situation. "4 days ago," Sophia began, counting on her little fingers. "She was making breakfast for me, and suddenly she fell on the floor. I got really scared and called our neighbor, Mrs. Davis. She called the ambulance and they took my mommy to the hospital." Edward's heart ached. The image of this child finding her mother collapsed on the kitchen floor was devastating, and he could barely imagine the terror she must have faced. "Have you been staying with Mrs. Davis since then?" he asked. "Yes, but she has a lot of kids and can't always watch me. That's why I came by myself to buy the heart, so Mommy can get better soon and we can go home." The pharmacist approached again, whispering something in Edward's ear. He had contacted the local hospital and confirmed there was indeed a patient in the cardiac ICU with a child who had gone missing that afternoon. The medical staff was worried and searching for Sophia. "Sophia," Edward said softly, "you know that hearts aren't something you can buy at a pharmacy, right? Your mommy's heart is inside her chest, and for her to get better, she needs a special surgery done by very smart doctors." The girl looked at him with confusion, then at the jar of coins she still held tightly. "But Mommy always said the pharmacy is where you buy things to fix an OE, and the doctor said her heart has a very big OE." Sophia's innocent logic was both touching and heartbreaking. Edward realized she had taken the doctor's words and the explanations she had received literally, constructing a plan in her child's mind to save her mother. "Would you like to come with me to the hospital to see your mommy?" Edward asked, knowing that this decision would change his life forever. "I can take you there and talk to the doctors to better understand how we can help her." Sophia looked at him with renewed hope in her eyes. "Odej, are you going to help buy the heart for Mommy?" Edward took a deep breath, feeling he was about to commit to something much larger than he could imagine. "I'm going to do everything in my power to help your mommy, Sophia. That I promise." The ride to the hospital was spent in the contemplative silence of Edward's car, broken only by the soft sound of the still lingering rain and Sophia's occasional comments about the city lights reflecting on the wet asphalt. Edward had called his driver, who arrived in minutes to pick them up from the pharmacy, and now he discreetly watched the girl in the rearview mirror. Sophia sat in the back seat, still clutching the jar of coins as if it were the most precious object in the world. She stared out the window with a thoughtful expression that seemed too old for her years, and Edward wondered what kind of responsibilities a 6-year-old had been forced to take on, to reach the point of setting out alone in search of a miracle to save her mother. "Mr. Edward," she said softly, interrupting his thoughts, "do you have any kids?" The question struck him like a sharp blade. Edward had dedicated so much time and energy to building his corporate empire that he had never seriously considered starting a family. He'd had relationships over the years, but they were always superficial, always maintaining a safe distance that protected him from emotional vulnerability. "No, Sophia, I don't have any kids," he answered, feeling a strange pang of regret. "And you? Do you like school?" "I do, but sometimes I miss it because I have to take care of Mommy when she's not feeling well," Sophia replied, matter-of-factly. "She always says she's sorry when it happens, but I don't mind. Mommy is more important than anything." Edward's chest tightened. The child's unconditional devotion to her mother made him reflect on his own family relationships, which had grown distant and formal over the years. When was the last time he had shown genuine love for someone without expecting anything in return? "What does your mommy do for work?" he asked, trying to better understand the family's financial situation. "She cleans houses in the morning, works at a store in the afternoon, and sometimes she babysits at night," Sophia answered, again counting on her fingers. "She always comes home really tired, but she always helps me with my homework and reads me stories before I go to sleep." Edward did a quick mental calculation. 3 jobs to support a child alone, all while dealing with health problems that were clearly worsening. The situation was far more complex than he had initially imagined. Where do you live?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. "In a small room in the basement of Mrs. Rose's house," Sophia replied. "It's not very big, but Mommy made it really pretty. She said one day we'd have our own house with a garden and everything." The driver pulled up in front of the hospital, and Edward felt a growing anxiety. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, but he had a feeling his life was about to change drastically. Sophia hopped out of the car, still carrying the jar of coins, and waited for him to join her. "Mr. Edward," she said, taking his hand with confidence, "do you think the doctors will let me give them these coins to help with Mommy's heart?" Edward looked at this brave child who was willing to give up her childhood dreams to save her mother, and he felt a profound transformation beginning to stir in his own heart. "Sophia, your coins are the most valuable gift any mother could receive, but let me talk to the doctors first to better understand the situation, okay?" They walked into the hospital, and Edward was immediately hit by the characteristic smell of disinfectant and the constant beeping of medical equipment. Sophia seemed to know the way, guiding him through the corridors with a familiarity that deeply saddened him. "It's over there," she said, "you pointing to a door with a sign that read, 'Cardiac ICU, restricted visitation.' Mommy's in there, but they only let me see her for 5 minutes at a time." Edward took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He had no idea that in a few minutes he would discover something that would change not only his perspective on this situation, but his entire understanding of his own past. The meeting with the medical team was more revealing than Edward had anticipated. Dr. Peterson, the cardiologist in charge of the case, received them in his office with an expression that mixed professionalism with genuine compassion. Sophia remained by Edward's side, still holding the jar of coins, as the doctor explained the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Evans is suffering from advanced dilated cardiomyopathy," Dr. Peterson explained, using terms he immediately simplified upon noticing Sophia's presence. "Her heart is very weak and can't pump enough blood to her body. Unfortunately, the only definitive solution would be a heart transplant." Edward felt the weight of those words. "And what are the chances of finding a compatible donor?" "There are waiting lists, and the process can take months or even years. Besides, it's an extremely expensive procedure," the doctor answered honestly. "We're doing everything we can to stabilize her, but the situation is delicate." Sophia looked at the doctor with her large, hopeful eyes. "Doctor, can these coins help buy the heart for Mommy?" She held up the jar with both hands, offering it as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. Dr. Peterson crouched down to her level, gently touching the jar. "Sophia, Your love for your mommy is worth more than all the money in the world. But the kind of heart she needs isn't something you buy. It's something another person has to donate when they no longer need it. Can I give my heart to mommy? Sophia asked with complete seriousness, and Edward felt tears burn in his eyes. The child's willingness to sacrifice everything for her mother was both inspiring and devastating. You need your heart to live and grow up, the doctor explained gently. But your love and care are the best medicine she can receive right now. Edward discreetly wiped his eyes and turned to the doctor. Doctor, is it possible for me to see the patient? I'd like to better understand the situation before deciding how I can help. Dr. Peterson hesitated for a moment. Normally, we only allow visits from direct family members, but considering the circumstances, he glanced at Sophia, who was holding Edward's hand with unwavering trust. I can make an exception. They walked through the ICU corridors, and Edward felt a growing anxiety. There was something about the situation that made him inexplicably nervous, as if he were about to confront something from his past that he had long tried to forget. She's in room 304, Dr. Peterson said, stopping in front of a door with a large window. She's sedated, but stable for the moment. Edward looked through the window and felt as if the floor had vanished from beneath his feet. The woman connected to the machines, with tubes and wires all over her body, was unmistakably Clara Evans, his first girlfriend, the first love of his life. Even after 27 years, even with her face pale and marked by suffering, he recognized her instantly. The memories came back in a flood. Clara at 17, with the same smile he now saw reflected in Sophia's face. The plans they had made together before he left to study abroad. The promises of eternal love that had seemed so real at the time. The way it had all ended when he decided to accept the scholarship for his MBA in London. Mr. Edward, are you okay? Sophia asked, lightly tugging his hand. You look very pale. Edward tried to regain his composure, but his mind was in turmoil. If Clara was Sophia's mother, and Sophia was 6 years old, that meant the calculations formed in his mind like pieces of a terrible puzzle. He had left for London in January of 2018. Sophia was likely born in September or October of that year. Doctor, Edward said, his voice tense. Ms. Evans, does she have any family? Anyone who can help with the medical expenses? Apparently not, Dr. Peterson replied. According to our records, she raised her daughter alone. There's no mention of a father or other close relatives. Edward looked at Sophia again, studying every detail of her face. Her eyes were exactly like Clara's, but the shape of her face, the way she smiled, even some of the gestures he had noticed. It was like looking at a mirror of his past self. I need a few minutes, Edward said, feeling like he was about to break down. Sophia, can you stay here with the doctor while I think about how we can help your mommy? Sophia nodded confidently, never imagining that the man who had promised to help her was just discovering that he might be far more than just a kind stranger. Edward walked away from the ICU with hurried steps, looking for a private place where he could process the discovery that was revolutionizing his entire understanding of the last 27 years of his life. Edward found himself sitting in the hospital garden on a bench, still damp from the rain that had finally stopped. His hands trembled as he tried to organize the thoughts crashing in his mind like furious waves. The discovery that Clara was here, fighting for her life just a few feet away, had awakened memories he had buried deep over the years. He remembered their last night together perfectly. It was December 2017, and they were in the small apartment Clara shared with a friend. They had talked about the future, about the dreams they shared, about how they would handle the distance when he left for London. Clara had cried, begging him not to go, saying she had a bad feeling that something would happen if he left her. You'll forget me, she had said, tears streaming down her face. You'll meet other people, have a new life, and I'll just be a memory from the past. Edward had promised that would never happen. He had sworn he would come back for her as soon as he finished his degree. He had given her a simple ring, promising it was just the beginning of a life together. But life had other plans. For the first few months in London, they spoke daily. Edward told her about his classes, the city, how much he missed her. Clara talked about the job she had found, about the plans she was still making for his return. But gradually, the calls became less frequent, more formal, until they stopped altogether. Edward had assumed Clara had moved on, just as he was trying to do. The demands of his MBA, the opportunities that began to arise in European companies, the possibility of a doctorate. Little by little, he postponed his return to the States until 3 years turned into 5, then 10. When he finally returned in 2028, he was a different man. He had built a solid career, accumulated valuable international experience, and developed a business acumen that would soon make him one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. He had tried to find Clara a few times, but learned she had moved, and he gradually gave up the search. Now, looking at his own hands, Edward calculated and recalculated the dates. If Clara had gotten pregnant in their last days together, Sophia would have been born in September 2018. The age fit perfectly. But why had Clara never tried to contact him? Why had she raised their daughter alone, facing extreme financial hardship when he could have helped? "Mr. Edward?" Sophia's voice brought him back to the present. She was running toward him, still carrying the jar of coins, followed by a concerned-looking nurse. "Sophia, I told you not to leave the ICU by yourself," the nurse said, clearly relieved to have found her. "Sorry, Carla, but I saw Mr. Edward out here and came to talk to him," Sophia replied, sitting next to Edward on the bench. "The doctor said maybe Mommy will wake up tonight. Can you stay here with me for when she wakes up?" Edward looked at this child, who seemed more familiar with each passing moment, not just in her features, but in gestures and expressions that echoed his own. "Sophia, tell me something. Has your mommy ever talked about your daddy?" Sophia grew thoughtful for a moment, swinging her little legs that didn't reach the ground. "Sometimes, when she's sad, she looks at an old photo and talks about a man who went away. She says he was very handsome and very smart, and that one day I would meet him." "She has a photo?" Edward asked, his heart racing. "She does. She keeps it in a little box under her bed with a small ring," Sophia answered innocently. "She always says he promised to come back, but that sometimes people get lost and take a long time to find their way home." Edward felt a deep ache in his chest. Clara had kept the ring he had given her. She had kept a photo of him. She had told Sophia about him. It meant she had never stopped waiting, never completely given up on the idea of a reunion. "Sophia," he said softly, "would you like it if I helped take care of you and your mommy? Not just with the hospital, but with everything you need. You'd really do that?" she asked, her big eyes shining with hope. "But you don't even know us that well." Edward smiled sadly. "Sometimes we know people much better than we think, Sophia. And sometimes taking a long time to find someone doesn't mean you've stopped caring about them." In that moment, Edward made a decision that would change his life forever. He needed to find out the truth about Sophia, about Clara, about the years lost between them. But more importantly, he needed to ensure that this family he had just rediscovered would never face hardship alone again. Night had fallen over the hospital when Dr. Peterson finally informed them that Clara had woken up and was stable enough for a brief visit. Edward felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation he hadn't experienced in decades, while Sophia held his hand with the innocent trust of a child who believes adults always know what to do. "Remember, Sophia, your mommy is still very weak," explained Carla, the nurse, as she escorted them through the ICU corridors. "You can only stay for 10 minutes, and you have to speak softly so you don't tire her out." Sophia nodded solemnly. Still clutching the jar of coins she refused to let go of. Edward took a deep breath, preparing for a meeting he had both dreamed of and feared for all those years. Room 304 was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of the monitors tracking Clara's vital signs. She was awake, her eyes turned toward the window, when Sophia ran in and stopped abruptly beside the bed. "Mommy!" Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I brought the coins to buy your new heart." Clara turned her head slowly, her eyes first finding her daughter's radiant face, then lifting to see Edward standing in the doorway. The expression that crossed her face was indescribable, a mixture of shock, recognition, pain, and something that might have been relief. "Edward," she murmured, her voice weak but unmistakable. "Is it really you?" Edward approached the bed with hesitant steps, feeling as if he were walking through a dream. "Hi, Clara. How are you feeling?" "Mommy, this is Mr. Edward that I told you about," Sophia said excitedly, oblivious to the tension filling the air between the two adults. "He promised he's going to help us. He brought us in his car and talked to the doctor and everything." Clara looked at her daughter, then back at Edward, trying to process the situation. "Sophia, honey, how did you meet Mr. Edward?" "I went to the pharmacy to try and buy a heart for you," Sophia explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "Mr. Edward was there, and he helped me. He's very handsome, isn't he, Mommy?" Edward saw tears well up in Clara's eyes and felt his own heart clench. There were so many things that needed to be said, so many explanations required, but Sophia's presence made any deeper conversation impossible. "Sophia," Clara said softly, "can you ask Carla, the nurse, to show you where they have some coloring books for kids? I need to talk to Mr. Edward about how he can help with the treatment." Sophia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, Mommy, but I'll be right back, okay? And I'll leave the coins right here." She carefully placed the jar on the bedside table and left the room, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with 27 years of unsaid words. Clara was the first to speak, her voice still weak but charged with emotion. "Why did you never answer my letters?" she asked, tears rolling down her pale cheeks. "I wrote so many times. I told you about the pregnancy, about Sophia, about how I was trying to raise her alone." Edward felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "What letters, Clara? I never received any letters from you. After the first few months, you stopped answering my emails and calls. I thought you had moved on." "Moved on?" Clara tried to sit up, but her weakness prevented it. "Edward, I was pregnant. I tried to tell you in every way I could. I sent letters to the address you gave me in London. I tried calling. I even asked friends who lived there to look for you." Edward felt the world spinning around him. "Clara, I swear to you, I never received anything. If I had known about Sophia, about you being pregnant, I would have come back immediately. You have to believe me." "Then how are you here now?" she asked, confused and emotionally exhausted. "How did you find Sophia?" "She found me," Edward answered, still trying to process the information about the letters. "She showed up in a pharmacy this afternoon, trying to buy a heart for you with a jar of coins. When I saw you here at the hospital, Clara, I knew who you were instantly." Clara closed her eyes, and Edward saw she was fighting against a wave of emotion and fatigue. "Sophia is your daughter, Edward. I always knew you'd come back one day somehow. She has your eyes, your way of smiling." The confirmation he had suspected hit Edward like a lightning bolt. Sophia was his daughter. He had a 6-year-old daughter who had grown up without a father, while her mother fought alone against financial hardship and a health crisis that now threatened her life. The following days passed in a whirlwind of emotions for Edward. He had checked into a hotel near the hospital to stay close to Sophia and Clara, trying to process the magnitude of his newfound fatherhood while arranging the best possible medical care for Clara. Dr. Peterson had agreed to move her to a private room where she could have more comfort and privacy to recover. Edward had spent hours consulting with specialists, seeking second opinions, and exploring every treatment option, Clara's situation was grave, but not hopeless. With the right treatment and, eventually, a heart transplant, she could lead a normal life again. The problem was that it would all cost a fortune, and the waiting lists were long. Sophia had adapted to Edward's presence with an ease that both moved and frightened him. She had started calling him Mr. Ed, and seemed genuinely happy to have someone helping her take care of her mother. During hospital visits, she would tell him stories about school, about her dreams for when her mum got better, about how she wished she had a complete family. It was on a Thursday morning that everything changed dramatically. Edward was in Clara's room, organizing some paperwork for the health insurance plan he had set up for her, when Dr. Peterson entered with a grave expression. "Edward, Clara, I need to speak with you about something urgent," the doctor said, closing the door behind him. "We just received a call from the transplant center. A donor heart that's a match for Clara has become available." Clara tried to sit up in bed, her eyes shining with hope. "That's wonderful. When can we do the surgery?" Dr. Peterson hesitated before continuing. "There's a complication. The heart is being contested by another patient, the 16-year-old son of Congressman Marcus Santana. His family is using all of their political influence to ensure their son gets the transplant first." A cold anger washed over Edward. "What do you mean, contested? Aren't there medical criteria to determine who has priority?" "There are," Dr. Peterson replied. "Based on the severity of the case and time on the list, Clara should have priority. But the congressman's son was transferred to the same hospital where the donor is, and there's immense administrative pressure for him to be first in line." "That's absurd," Edward exclaimed, feeling his years of business experience challenged by a situation where money and influence seemed to matter more than human life. "There has to be something we can do." "What worries me most," Dr. Peterson continued, "is that Clara doesn't have much time. Her condition has deteriorated in the last 48 hours. If we lose this opportunity, it could be months before another compatible donor becomes available." Clara gripped Edward's hand tightly, and he could feel how weak she was. "Edward, I don't want you to get into a political fight because of me. You've already done too much for us." "Clara, you are the mother of my child," Edward said firmly. "I will not stand by while corrupt politicians play games with your life." At that moment, Sophia entered the room carrying a drawing she had made for her mother. It was a family of three, her, Clara, and Edward, all holding hands in front of a house with a garden. Unaware of the gravity of the conversation, she proudly showed off the drawing. "Look, Mommy, I drew our new family. When you get better, we're going to live in a house just like this," Sophia said, climbing onto the bed to hug Clara. Edward looked at the scene, his daughter embracing her mother, who was fighting for her life, while politicians tried to manipulate the healthcare system for their own benefit, and he felt a fierce determination build in his chest. "Dr. Peterson," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "I want you to connect me immediately with everyone responsible for this process. I will use every resource I have, every contact, all the influence I've built over the years to ensure that Clara gets this transplant." "Edward, it could be dangerous to cross powerful people," Dr. Peterson warned. Edward looked again at Sophia and Clara, and he knew he was about to make the most important decision of his life. "Doctor, I've built an empire, amassed a fortune and influence. If I can't use all of that to save the woman I love and the daughter I just found, then nothing I've achieved has any value." The battle that would begin at that moment would test not only Edward's resources and determination, but would also force him to confront what kind of man he truly wanted to be. Someone who hid behind power and money, or someone who fought for justice, even if it meant risking everything. The next 72 hours became the most intense battle of Edward's life. He mobilized his legal team, contacted trusted investigative journalists, and called in every political favor he had cultivated over the years. But the deeper he dug, the more he uncovered about the extent of the corruption surrounding the case. Congressman Marcus Santana was not only using his influence to benefit his son, but had created a network of favors that included hospital administrators, doctors, and even members of the Medical Ethics Board. Edward discovered it wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and that several less fortunate families had lost loved ones due to similar manipulations of the transplant system. During this period, Edward split his time between strategic meetings and moments at the hospital with Clara and Sophia. The little girl had sensed something was wrong, despite the adults' efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy in her presence. "Mr. Ed," Sophia said one afternoon, as Edward helped her with homework beside Clara's bed. "But why does everyone start whispering when I come near? Mommy is going to get better soon, right?" Edward exchanged a worried look with Clara, who was visibly weaker. The doctors had been clear. She had a week at most before her condition became irreversible, even with a transplant. "Sophia, sometimes adults have to solve very complicated problems to help the people they love," Edward explained, sitting beside her. "But I promise you, I am doing everything I can to make your mommy better." "I know you'll do it," Sophia said with a confidence that broke Edward's heart. "Mommy always said that when you really love someone, you find a way to protect them." Clara reached out a weak hand to touch Edward's face. "Sophia's right. You were always like that, Edward. Once you made up your mind, nothing in the world could stop you." That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep in an armchair beside Clara's bed, Edward received a call that would change the course of the entire situation. It was his lead attorney, Martin Reed, with a disturbing discovery. "Edward, we found something important," Martin said, his voice tense. "The congressman's son isn't actually in critical condition. He has a heart condition, yes, but it's stable and manageable with medication. The transplant would be preventative, not an emergency." A wave of indignation washed over Edward. "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely. We gained access to his medical records through a contact at the hospital. The boy could live for years with proper treatment. Meanwhile, Clara has days, maybe hours, if she doesn't get this transplant. And can we use this information legally? We're filing a lawsuit first thing in the morning. But Edward, you need to know. The congressman found out you're investigating the case. He's made some threats, discreet, but they're threats." Edward looked at Clara sleeping, and Sophia curled up in the chair, and he felt an iron resolve take hold of him. "Martin, what kind of threats?" "He said he has enough influence to cause serious problems for your businesses. He can block government contracts, create tax complications, mobilize the press against you. Basically, he's trying to buy you off or intimidate you." Edward clenched his fists. Throughout his career, he had faced tough competitors, economic crises, and seemingly impossible challenges. But he had never faced a situation where human lives were at stake, especially the life of the woman he loved and the daughter he had just discovered. "Martin, I want you to accelerate all legal proceedings. At the same time, prepare for a war. If the congressman wants to play with threats, he's about to find out he picked the wrong opponent. Edward, are you sure? This could destroy everything you've built." Edward looked again at Clara and Sophia, and the answer came without hesitation. "Martin, if I can't save my family, nothing I've built has any value. I would rather lose my entire empire fighting for them than live as a rich coward." After hanging up, Edward sat beside Clara's bed and gently took her hand. She woke up and looked at him with those eyes that still held the same sweetness from 27 years ago. "Edward, I heard you," she whispered. "I don't want you to destroy yourself for me. Sophia will need you after I'm—" "No," Edward interrupted firmly. "You are not going to die, Clara. I won't let you. And Sophia is not going to grow up without her mother, just as she won't grow up without her father. We are going to be a family, the way it always should have been." Clara smiled faintly, and Edward saw a tear roll down her cheek. "I love you, Edward. I never stopped loving you." "I love you too," he replied, gently kissing her forehead. And now I'm going to prove it. The next morning brought a revelation that shook Edward in a way he hadn't expected. While awaiting news on the lawsuit his lawyers had filed, he received a call from his personal assistant, Marina, who had been digging into his past to better understand why Clara's letters had never reached him. "Mr. Miles, I need to speak with you urgently," Marina said, her voice strained. "I've discovered something about the letters Ms. Evans mentioned. Can you come to the office?" Edward was reluctant to leave the hospital, but Marina's insistence convinced him it was important. He asked Carla, the nurse, to keep an eye on Sophia, who was playing in the room beside Clara's bed, and headed to his office downtown. What Marina had discovered was devastating. Through old contacts and meticulous investigation, she had found that Clara's letters had indeed arrived at Edward's address in London, but they had been intercepted by Margaret Miles, Edward's aunt and a minority partner in his first company, who had travelled to London several times during that period under the pretext of checking on her nephew's business affairs. "She kept all the letters, sir," Marina explained, handing him a dusty shoebox. "I found this in her apartment after she passed away last year. Her housekeeper gave it to me, saying that Mrs. Miles had asked her to do so if anything happened to her." Edward opened the box with trembling hands and found more than 50 letters from Clara, all addressed to him, all opened and read. The first ones were joyful, telling him about the pregnancy and their plans for his return. Gradually, the tone shifted to desperation, then sadness, until the final letters were desperate pleas for him to at least respond, even if it was just to say he wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. "There's a letter from your aunt as well," Marina said softly, explaining why she did it. With shaking hands, Edward opened Margaret's letter. "My dearest Edward, if you are reading this, it means I'm no longer here to explain myself. I know what I did was terrible. But at the time, I thought I was protecting you. Clara came from a poor, uneducated family, and I feared she would destroy your brilliant future. I thought if she believed you had moved on, she would too, and you would both be happier apart. I never imagined she would raise the child alone, nor that you would return without knowing you were a father. I ask for your forgiveness, but I know I don't deserve it. The letters are all here. Perhaps one day you can find a way to fix what I broke." Edward felt as if the world was collapsing around him. 27 years of separation, of Clara's suffering, of Sophia growing up without a father, all because of his aunt's arrogance and prejudice. He thought of all the times Clara had struggled, all the nights Sophia had asked about her father, all the difficult moments they had faced alone. "Marina, I need to get back to the hospital," Edward said, putting the letters back in the box. "And I want you to cancel all my appointments for the next week. I don't care what happens to the company, the business, anything. My family is my priority now." On the way back to the hospital, Edward battled the devastating guilt that consumed him. How had he been so blind as to not realize what was happening? How had he allowed his aunt to manipulate his life so cruelly? And more importantly, how would he tell Clara that her letters were never ignored, but hidden by a member of his own family? When he arrived at the hospital, he found Sophia playing with paper dolls a nurse had given her, while Clara slept, connected to more equipment than she had been that morning. Dr. Peterson was in the room, checking the monitors with a worried expression. "How is she, doctor?" Edward asked, trying to keep his voice firm. "Edward, I have to be honest with you," Dr. Peterson replied. "Clara is deteriorating more rapidly than we expected. We have maybe 48 hours before it's too late, even with a transplant." Sophia looked up at the two men, sensing the gravity in the doctor's voice. "Mr. Ed, Mommy's going to get better, right? You promised you would take care of us." Edward knelt beside Sophia, holding her small hands. "Sophia, sometimes adults face very difficult problems, but I promise you, I will fight until the very last second to make your mommy well. Do you trust me?" "I trust you," Sophia replied without hesitation. "You're my daddy, aren't you? I know you won't let anything bad happen to Mommy." Sophia's question hit Edward like a thunderbolt. She had figured out the truth on her own, with the pure intuition of a child. Edward looked at Clara, who had woken up and was watching the scene with tears in her eyes. "Yes, Sophia," Edward said, his voice choked with emotion. "I am your daddy, and I'm going to prove to you and your mommy that a real daddy never gives up on his family." At that moment, Edward made the bravest decision of his life. He would tell Clara the whole truth about the letters, ask for her forgiveness, and then do whatever it took to ensure she received the transplant, even if it meant destroying Congressman Santana's political career and exposing the entire corrupt healthcare system. That night, after Sophia had finally fallen asleep on the sofa bed Edward had arranged for the room, he approached Clara's bed with the box of letters in his hands. She was awake, gazing out the window at the city lights, and Edward knew she sensed that something important was about to happen. "Clara, I need to tell you something that's going to be very hard to hear," Edward began, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "About the letters you sent me." Clara turned to him, and Edward saw a mix of curiosity and apprehension in her eyes. "Did you find out why they never reached you?" Edward opened the box and carefully took out the time-yellowed letters. "They did arrive, Clara. All of them. But they were intercepted by my Aunt Margaret, who was living in London at the time." Clara was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Edward saw a range of emotions cross her face: anger, sadness, and relief at knowing he hadn't willfully ignored her. "Why?" she asked simply. "Prejudice," Edward answered with brutal honesty. "She thought you weren't good enough for me, that you would get in the way of my career. She thought she was protecting me." Clara closed her eyes, and Edward saw tears roll down her face. 27 years, Edward. 27 years raising our daughter alone, working 3 jobs, struggling to get by because someone decided I wasn't worthy of you. "Clara, Edward started, but she cut him off. "No," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Let me finish. For all those years, I blamed myself. I thought I had done something wrong, that you had forgotten me so easily. There were nights I cried from exhaustion and despair, looking at Sophia sleeping and wondering how I was going to give her the life she deserved." Edward held her hand, feeling the weight of every word. "Clara, if I had known, I know you would have come back," she said, squeezing his hand weakly. "I always knew it, deep down. That's why I could never completely forget you. That's why I kept your ring all these years." Edward pulled one of the letters from the box, one of the first, where Clara wrote excitedly about her pregnancy. "Can I read it?" Clara nodded, and Edward began to read, his voice thick with emotion. "My love, I'm so happy I can barely contain it. We're having a baby. I know you'll be as thrilled as I am. I'm already imagining what it will be like when you come back and meet our child. Will they have your clever eyes or my stubborn smile?" Tears were now streaming freely down both their faces. Edward continued reading several more letters, each one revealing Clara's deep love, her fears about raising a child alone, her plans for his return. "There's something I need to ask you," Clara said when he finished. "If you had received these letters back then, would you have been happy, or would you have felt trapped, obligated to come back?" Edward looked directly into her eyes. "Clara, finding out about Sophia was the best moment of my life. These last few days, seeing you both, being a father for the first time, I've realized that all the success I've achieved meant nothing without a family to share it with. If I had received your letters, I would have been on the next flight home, and we would have built a beautiful life together." Clara smiled for the first time in days. "Then we didn't lose those years completely. They brought us here, to this moment." Just then, Sophia stirred on the sofa, murmuring something in her sleep. They both looked at her, and Edward felt a wave of renewed determination. "Clara, "The decision about the transplant will be made tomorrow," he said. "My lawyers are confident we can reverse the congressman's move. But if for some reason we can't win in court, I'm prepared to go further." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, worried. "I'm prepared to go public with the full extent of the corruption in this case. I have investigative journalists ready to release how the transplant system is being manipulated. It could destroy the congressman's career, but it could also make me many powerful enemies." Clara gripped his hand with more strength than Edward thought she still possessed. "Edward, you can't risk everything for me. Sophia will need you, even if I—" "Don't talk like that," Edward interrupted. "You're going to get better, Clara. We are going to be a family. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for these lost years, taking care of you both the way I always should have." "And if something goes wrong?" she asked in a low voice. Edward looked at Sophia sleeping, then back at Clara. "Then I will make sure Sophia grows up knowing exactly how much you both are loved, and that she never wants for anything. But first, I'm going to fight with every fiber of my being to make sure that isn't necessary." Clara closed her eyes, seeming more at peace than she had been in days. "I love you, Edward. I always have. I love you too, Clara. And tomorrow, we start our new life together." Outside the room, Dr. Peterson finished reviewing the latest charts and shook his head sadly. By his calculations, Clara had 24 hours at most. Time was running out. The dawn brought devastating news. Dr. Peterson arrived in the room with a grim expression that made Edward's heart pound. Clara had had a very difficult night, and her vital signs were deteriorating rapidly. They had a few hours at best before it would be too late, even with a transplant. "Edward," Dr. Peterson said in a low voice, stepping away from the bed where Clara was dozing. "I have to be brutally honest. If the transplant doesn't happen today, by late afternoon, there will be no more time." Edward felt as if the floor was disappearing from under his feet. He looked at Sophia, who was sitting beside her mother's bed, holding her hand and whispering stories she had learned at school. "And the lawsuit?" Edward asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's still pending. The congressman managed to delay the hearing on a technicality. Your lawyers are doing everything they can, but—" Edward didn't let the doctor finish. He knew the time had come to make the riskiest decision of his life. He picked up his phone and called Martin Reed. "Martin, execute Plan B. I want every journalist we've contacted to receive the complete dossier on Congressman Santana's corruption. Documents, audio recordings, everything. I want this on the headlines of every major news outlet in 2 hours. Edward, are you sure? Once this goes public, there's no turning back. The congressman will use all of his influence to destroy you. Do it, Martin. I don't care about the consequences for me." After hanging up, Edward approached Sophia. "Sweetheart, I need to go out for a few hours to take care of something important to help your mommy. Can you stay here with Carla?" Sophia looked at him with those large, trusting eyes. "Are you going to save Mommy?" "Daddy?" Edward's heart clenched hearing Sophia call him Daddy so naturally. "I'm going to do everything in my power, my princess. You take care of Mommy while I'm gone, okay?" Sophia nodded solemnly. "I'll tell her more stories. Carla said sick people get better when they hear beautiful stories." Edward kissed Sophia's forehead, then leaned over Clara, who had weakly opened her eyes. "I'll be back soon," he whispered in her ear. "Hold on. Our family depends on it." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. From his office, Edward watched as the first stories about the corruption in the transplant system began to break in the media. The investigative journalists had done an impeccable job, exposing not only the specific case of the congressman's son, but an entire network of political favoritism that had existed for years. Edward's phone began to ring incessantly. First, it was the congressman's lawyers, trying to negotiate. Then, well-known politicians attempting to mediate the situation. Finally, Congressman Santana himself called. "Miles, you have no idea what you've just done," Santana said, his voice furious. "I will destroy your company, your contracts. your reputation. When I'm done with you, there will be nothing left." "Congressman," Edward replied with a calm that surprised even himself, "you can try to destroy my company, my fortune, my reputation, but you can't destroy my love for my family, and now the entire country knows what kind of man you really are. This won't change anything. My son is still getting that transplant." "We'll see," Edward said and hung up. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. It was Dr. Peterson, and Edward could hear the emotion in his voice. "Edward, you did it. The Medical Ethics Board just overturned the previous decision. Clara is at the top of the list for the transplant. The surgery can begin in 3 hours. Edward closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Doctor, is she strong enough for the surgery?" "It's going to be difficult, very risky, but it's the only chance she has." Edward rushed back to the hospital, where he found a touching scene. Sophia was sitting beside Clara's bed, humming a song softly. Clara was awake, though very weak, and she smiled faintly when she saw Edward enter. "Did you do it?" she asked in a whisper. "I did," Edward replied, taking her hand. "You're going into surgery in a few hours." Sophia jumped from her chair and hugged Edward. "I knew you would do it, Daddy. I knew it." Dr. Peterson entered the room with the surgical prep team. "Clara, are you ready for this?" Clara looked at Edward and Sophia, then back at the doctor. "Doctor, I have a family to live for. I'm more than ready." As the medical team began the preparations to take Clara to the operating room, Edward held her hand firmly. "I'll be here when you wake up," he promised. "We'll be here. Our family will be complete." "Mommy," Sophia said, climbing onto the bed for one last hug. "When you wake up, we'll go home together. The three of us, like a real family." Clara hugged her daughter with the little strength she had left. "I love you so much, my princess. And I love your daddy, too." When they wheeled Clara into the operating room, Edward stood in the hallway with Sophia in his arms, both watching through the window as the doors swung shut. The most important battle of his life was just beginning. The 8-hour surgery was the longest of Edward's life. He remained in the surgical waiting room with Sophia on his lap, watching every movement of the doctors passing through the corridors, trying to decipher any sign on their faces about how Clara's operation was progressing. Sophia had behaved like a child, far older than her 6 years. She didn't cry or make a fuss, but Edward could feel the tension in her small body. Every so often, she would ask simple questions about the surgery, and Edward would try to explain in a way she could understand without being frightened. "Daddy," Sophia said during the 5th hour of waiting, "why does it take so long to put a new heart in Mommy?" "Because it's a very delicate surgery, Princess," Edward explained, stroking her hair. "The doctors have to be very careful to do everything just right, so that when Mommy wakes up, she'll be strong and healthy. And then she can run and play with me." Edward felt a pang in his chest, thinking of all the times Clara probably couldn't play with Sophia because of the weakness caused by her heart condition. "Yes, sweetheart, after she recovers, Mommy will be able to do everything you've always wanted to do together." During the wait, Edward received several work-related calls that he ignored completely. Martin had called a few times to update him on the fallout from exposing Congressman Santana. Apparently, the scandal had gone national, and several other irregularities in the healthcare system were now under investigation. But none of that mattered to Edward at that moment. His only concern was that Clara survived the surgery. In the 6th hour, Dr. Peterson appeared in the waiting room, still in his surgical scrubs but without his cap and gloves. Edward's heart stopped for a moment. "How is she, Doctor?" Edward asked, trying to read the expression on the doctor's face. "The surgery is going well," Dr. Peterson replied, and Edward felt an immense sense of relief. The new heart is functioning perfectly. "But we still have another 2 hours to go. The most delicate part is still ahead." "Is Mommy going to be okay?" Sophia asked, climbing down from Edward's lap to get closer to the doctor. Dr. Peterson knelt to her level. "Your Mommy is a very strong fighter, Sophia. She's fighting very hard to get better and come home to you and your daddy." When the doctor left, Edward realized there were more people in the waiting room than when they had arrived. Marina had brought flowers and was talking quietly with Carla, the nurse. Martin was at a table in the corner, working on his laptop, probably dealing with the legal fallout of the congressman's exposure. "Mr. Ed," Sophia said, tugging on Edward's shirt, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Princess. What's the secret?" Sophia leaned close to his ear and whispered, "I always knew you were my daddy, since the very first day at the pharmacy. You have the same kind of smile I see when I look in the mirror." Edward felt tears burn his eyes. "How did you know?" "Because Mommy always said my daddy had kind eyes and a big heart. When I saw you helping to buy her heart, I knew it was you." Edward hugged Sophia tightly, realizing how much he had underestimated the intuition and intelligence of this extraordinary child. "You're very smart. You know that it runs in the family," Sophia said with a smile that was exactly like Clara's. At the 8-hour mark, Dr. Peterson returned to the waiting room, this time with a more relaxed expression. Edward stood up immediately, holding Sophia's hand. "The surgery was a success," the doctor announced, and Edward felt as if he could breathe again for the first time in hours. "The new heart is functioning perfectly. Clara is being taken to the post-op ICU, where she'll stay for the next few days while she recovers." "Can I see her?" Edward asked. "She's still sedated and connected to several machines, but yes, you can see her for a few minutes." Edward picked Sophia up and followed the doctor down the hall to the post-op ICU. Through the window, they could see Clara connected to various pieces of equipment, but Edward immediately noticed something different. Her breathing seemed stronger, and the color in her skin was better than it had been in weeks. "She looks stronger," Sophia commented, pressing her small face against the window. "She is stronger," Dr. Peterson confirmed. "The new heart is pumping blood properly throughout her body. Over the next few hours, we'll monitor her recovery closely, but all indications are very positive." Edward held Sophia tighter, looking at the woman he loved fighting to come back to them. "How long until she wakes up?" "Probably a few hours. But Edward, Sophia, you need to understand that the recovery will be gradual. Clara will need special care, physical therapy, and controlled medications. It won't be a quick process." "It doesn't matter," Edward said firmly. "We'll take care of her for as long as it takes. We have a family to rebuild." Sophia nodded gravely. "I'll help take care of Mommy. I'll read her stories every day until she's all better." Dr. Peterson smiled. "I think with you two looking after her, Clara will have the best recovery possible." As they stood watching Clara through the window, Edward felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The battle had been won, his family was safe, and now, finally, they could begin to build the life together they were always meant to have. 3 weeks after the surgery, Clara was finally discharged from the hospital. Edward had completely transformed his penthouse, adapting it to welcome Clara and Sophia with all the comfort needed for her recovery. He had hired a private nurse, a physical therapist, and even a private tutor for Sophia, ensuring that his new family wanted for nothing. The day of her discharge was emotional for everyone. Sophia had made a giant sign that read, "Welcome home, Mommy," with colorful drawings of hearts and a family of 3 holding hands. Clara, still weak, but with a vitality in her eyes she hadn't shown in years, cried with emotion when she saw the apartment Edward had prepared. "Edward, this is too much," Clara said, looking at the specially decorated room with a view of the park Sophia loved, and a comfortable armchair where she could rest during the day. "You didn't have to do all this?" "Yes, I did," Edward replied, helping her into the armchair. "I have 27 years to make up for, and this is just the first of many things I want to do for our family." Sophia ran through the apartment, exploring every corner with the typical curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Daddy, can I have this whole room for myself?" she asked, standing in the doorway of a room decorated like a fairy tale, complete with a castle-shaped bed and shelves full of children's books. "Of course, Princess. This is your room," Edward said, crouching down beside her, "and you're going to live here with us forever." During the first few days at home, Edward discovered the simple joys of fatherhood he had missed in Sophia's early years. He helped her with her homework, made breakfast while Clara rested, and read stories to her every night before bed. Clara recovered gradually, gaining strength with each passing day. The physical therapy sessions helped rebuild her stamina, and Edward could see the vibrant woman he had known at 17 being reborn in her healed body. "You know what moves me the most," Clara said one night as they watched Sophia sleep in her new bed. "It's not just being alive. It's being able to plan for the future for the first time in years, being able to dream about family trips, Sophia's graduations, grandchildren." Edward smiled, putting his arm around Clara's shoulders. "I'm discovering that too. For years, my plans always involved business deals, financial targets, company expansion. Now I want to plan birthdays, school vacations, school plays." 2 weeks later, Edward made a decision that surprised even his closest partners. He resigned as CEO of his company, retaining only a board seat that would allow him to have full time for his family. Martin tried to talk him out of it, arguing it was a hasty decision. "Edward, you built this empire over 20 years. Are you sure you want to give it all up?" "Martin, I'm not giving anything up," Edward replied with a serenity that surprised the lawyer. "I'm choosing something far more valuable. For years, I thought success meant having the biggest office, the highest revenue, the most prestige. Now I've discovered that success is waking up next to the woman I love and having breakfast with my daughter." The decision had significant financial consequences, but Edward found he didn't care. They moved to a smaller house, but one with a garden where Sophia could play. Clara gradually returned to work, but now as the coordinator of a program Edward had created to help low-income families with children in need of transplants. "It's ironic," Clara said one day, organizing files for families who would benefit from the program. "My illness, which almost destroyed us, has become a way to help other people." "It's not ironic," Edward replied, hugging her from behind. "It's fate giving us a second chance and teaching us that our pain can be transformed into help for others." Sophia adapted to her new life with an ease that impressed the adults. She insisted on helping Clara with her physical therapy exercises, organized her mother's medications as if she were an experienced nurse, and every night told Edward everything she had learned at school. "Daddy," Sophia said one night as Edward was tucking her in, "thank you for buying Mommy's heart." Edward smiled, remembering that first day in the pharmacy. "Sophia, I didn't buy Mommy's heart. I discovered that you can't buy a heart. You earn it when you truly love people." "So you earned our hearts?" Sophia asked with that childish logic that always surprised him. "You too earned my heart," Edward replied, kissing his daughter's forehead. "Forever." 3 months after the surgery, Dr. Peterson declared Clara fully recovered. Her new heart was functioning perfectly, and she had resumed nearly all her normal activities. To celebrate, Edward organized a party at the same pharmacy where it all began. "This is where our family was truly born," he said to Clara and Sophia as they entered St. Jude's pharmacy, now decorated with balloons and flowers. "It was here that a brave little girl taught me that sometimes the simplest questions lead to the most important discoveries of our lives." Sophia, now with a renewed confidence and a smile that could light up any room, held her parents' hands and said, "Now I know you can't buy a heart at a pharmacy. It grows when people really love each other." The family was finally complete, healed not only from illness, but also from the wounds of lost time. A year after that transformative meeting at St. Jude's, Edward, Drew, Clara, and Sophia returned to the location to inaugurate the Compassionate Heart Program, an initiative offering free medical guidance and support to families facing cardiac issues. The small neighborhood pharmacy had become a symbol of a second chance for many people, Sophia, now 7 Dutch, had grown not just in height, but in wisdom and compassion. She became a little ambassador for the program, helping other children who arrived scared with sick parents or relatives. Her natural ability to comfort and explain complex situations simply impressed even the volunteer doctors. "Excuse me, Mr. Pharmacist," Sophia said to the elderly owner of the pharmacy. "Do you remember when I came here to try and buy a heart for my mommy?" The old man smiled, patting the girl's hair. How could I ever forget, my dear? You came in here with that little jar of coins, determined to save your mother." "I still have the jar," Sophia said proudly. "It's in our living room now, and Daddy says it's to remind us that sometimes the simplest questions have the most important answers." Edward watched his daughter with a pride that still surprised him every day. Over that year, he had discovered that being a father was far more complex and rewarding than any business he had ever run. Every achievement of Sophia's at school, every new drawing she made of their family, every "I love you, Daddy," before bed was worth more than all the $1 million contracts he had ever signed. Clara approached him, radiant with health and happiness. Her hair had grown back, her eyes shone with the vitality the illness had stolen for years, and she wore a blue dress that enhanced the color that had returned to her face. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, following his gaze towards Sophia, who was now helping Dr. Peterson explain cardiac procedures to a family. "I'm thinking about how life has these unexplainable turns," Edward replied, putting his arm around Clara's waist. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd leave the CEO position to take care of my family, I would have thought they were crazy." "And do you regret it?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer from the smile on his face. "Never. I discovered that success isn't about how much money you have or how many people work for you. Success is waking up in the morning knowing that the most important people in your life are safe and happy." Dr. Peterson approached them, carrying a folder with documents. "Edward, Clara, I have some news you'll like. The program has already helped 15 families get proper treatment, and 3 children have already received transplants thanks to the guidance and financial support you've provided." Edward felt a deep satisfaction that no business success had ever given him. "And the costs, Doctor? Are we within budget?" "More than that. We've secured partnerships with other hospitals and even the state government. The program is expanding to other cities." Clara smiled, remembering how alone and helpless she had felt when she was sick. "It's amazing to think that our experience can help other families avoid going through what we went through." At that moment, a young woman entered the pharmacy carrying a boy of about 4. She looked around with the same expression of despair and confusion Edward remembered seeing on Sophia's face a year ago. Sophia noticed immediately and approached the woman. "Hi, Mom. Can I help you and your little boy?" The woman looked at this child who spoke with the confidence of someone much older. "My son has a sick heart. They said we need a specialist, but we don't know how to find one." Sophia gently took the boy's hand. "Don't worry. There are very nice people here who will help you. My mommy had a sick heart too, but now she's all better. Do you want me to show you how we got help?" Edward and Clara watched as their extraordinary daughter guided the family to Dr. Peterson, explaining with the naturalness of a child, but the wisdom of someone who had lived a similar experience, how the program worked and how they could get help. "She's going to be a doctor when she grows up," Clara said with pride. "Or a social worker, or a nurse, or any profession that lets her help people," Edward agreed. "She has something special, something you can't teach in any school." As the afternoon ended and they prepared to go home, Sophia ran to the spot where she had stood a year ago, holding her jar of coins. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if making a special wish. "What are you wishing for, Princess?" Edward asked, crouching beside her. Sophia opened her eyes and smiled. "I'm not wishing for anything, Daddy. I'm being thankful for us finding each other, for Mommy being well, and for discovering that when you help other people, your own heart gets even bigger." Edward hugged his daughter, feeling his eyes well up. "You know you're the one who taught that to me and Mommy, right?" "How?" Sophia asked, curious. "When you came into that pharmacy a year ago, trying to buy a heart for Mommy, you taught me that true love makes you capable of anything, and that sometimes, when you try to save someone, you end up saving yourself too." Clara joined the hug, and the three of them stood there for a few minutes, a family that had been separated by fate and reunited by the power of love and determination. As they walked home, Edward looked at the two women who had completely transformed his life. Clara, strong and healthy, radiating the happiness of someone given a second chance. Sophia, growing in wisdom and kindness, destined to bring the same compassion to the world that had saved her family. St. Jude's Pharmacy fell behind them, but its importance would remain in their lives forever. It was the starting point of a journey that had proven that true love knows no obstacles, that family is the most precious treasure, and that sometimes we need to get completely lost to find our way home. Sophia had discovered that hearts can't be bought in pharmacies, but they grow when people truly love each other. Edward had learned that real success isn't measured in money, but in shared moments of happiness. And Clara had understood that forgiveness and second chances can heal wounds far deeper than any surgery. Together, they had built something far more valuable than a corporate empire, a family based on true love, mutual understanding, and the certainty that no matter what storms life brought, they would face them together. The jar of coins that Sophia had brought to buy a heart now decorated their living room, a daily reminder that true love is priceless, but has the power to change entire lives.